So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel, starting with moderator Kevin Blackistone of the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, ESPN, and the Washington Post. Kevin.
Thank you.
Bonnie Bernstein, formerly the commentator for CBS and ESPN, and now president of Walk Swiftly Productions. Bonnie.
Hello, hello.
And Jimmy Roberts of NBC Sports and the Golf Channel. Jimmy.
George, sorry, we're not all there with you tonight.
Oh, and then Frank Isola, from the Athletic website and ESPN. Frank.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Good to see everybody.
Just great, Frank. Daniel Oyefusi from the Baltimore Sun. And without further ado, I want to thank the panel and turn it over to Kevin.
Well, thank you very much, George, and thank you to all the participants and all the viewers participating in the first virtual Povich panel discussion. Not coming from the University of Maryland, but from coming all the places that we are, but associated, obviously, with the University of Maryland. And we only have an hour or so, so I'll get right to the, I want to get right to the panelists and talking about the situation that we all find ourselves in. I'm going to start with Bonnie, since you're the most popular graduate of the 90s. From the Merrill College of Journalism.
I don't know about that. When did Van Pelt graduate?
He didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, that's Scott's.
If I'm not mistaken, you have said before that you got your sports fanaticism from 1986, watching the Mets beat the Red Sox in the World Series.
Yes.
And with that in mind, I just want to ask, it was reported last week that Noah Syndergaard, Mets ace,
really? This is what you had to start with.
Went in, yes, I did. He went in for Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
And there has been some wonderment about how he was able to do this and whether or not it was right and whether or not we in the media even covered that story correctly, given all the suggestions that because of this pandemic and because of the shortage of medical materials and the demands on medical labor, whether or not that type of operation, that type of surgery should have been put off until we get through this crisis. How did we cover that story, particularly from your perspective in New York and being a Mets fan?
Well, as a Mets fan, it was heartbreaking because usually April is the time of year that we have hope. Their record in April is above 500. We think good things happen. And then usually around June, right before the All-Star break, it all goes in the tank. So, hearing about Syndergaard, that Thor was out and Tommy John surgery and all that sort of stuff was heartbreaking because we're not used to that news so soon in the season. In terms of how we've covered it, I think how we've covered all of this deserves to a certain degree, and I don't mean to be too light on us because I'm part of the media, with a bit of leniency, because there's simply no precedence, Kev, for how to cover this. So many of the facts, the data we're hearing, and we're trying to fact check, but how do we know? In terms of whether the surgery should have happened at a time where all elective surgeries, or as many of them as possible, have been canceled or postponed, no, of course he should not have gotten it. But this is a bigger topic about what economic class entitles people on the upper echelon to be able to do. Just like so many NBA players and professional athletes were able to get access to testing when so many people who feel like they have symptoms have been at risk and couldn't have access, that's because of money and connections. Now those sorts of things are being shut down because there has been media attention. But is it fair for us to criticize? I mean, yes, I'm sure we could, but it's not like it's anything new. The wealthy have access to things that people who are not wealthy do not.
And Frank, to that point, you were right there watching what happened with the Nets after Rudy Gobert a week earlier had tested positive, and 4 members of the Nets, including Kevin Garnett, got tested positive. And Bonnie, and as Bonnie mentioned, all of a sudden people wonder, well, how is it that the NBA players can get tested when other people who have symptoms are struggling to get tested? Did we in the media not handle that situation as harshly as maybe we should have?
I don't think we understood really the scope of it all like we do today. And, hopefully this is going to be the worst of it. But Kevin, if you go back to that time, the Nets were in Los Angeles. They played a game on a Tuesday. They were going to play that first game on a Thursday without fans. Government officials in San Francisco had said no more gatherings of more than 250 people. So they told the Warriors, you're going to play the Nets without fans. So the Nets were getting ready to head up to San Francisco. They had just arrived when the Rudy Gobert news came down. They had been with their families. They were actually going back to LA to play the Clippers on Friday. So a lot of the people in their traveling party stayed in LA. So once they heard the news and the season had been suspended, they decided to fly back right then. So here's what happened. The owner of the team, Joe Tsai, and this goes to what Bonnie was talking about in terms of economic class, he paid for their test. And when that story came out, like you mentioned, Kevin Durant and a bunch of other Nets had tested positive. The mayor of the city of New York was very critical of it as well. And it's the oldest story in hey, if a player on the Nets gets an injury, he's going to be first online to get an MRI, and he's going to get the best treatment. So this kind of just fell in line. I know a lot of people in New York, including the mayor, did not like it.
And in the wake of this, Jimmy, the golf season is about to get started. And the Players' Championship is going on. And they actually started on a Thursday, and then Thursday night decided, you know what, we're going to call this whole thing off. Why didn't golf react as quickly, given what was going on in the NBA at that time, and just say, you know what, we're not even going to gather?
Well, I think golf did react quickly. What you have to remember is that it was a pretty fluid time, Kevin. So initially, the decision was made that the Players' Championship, which is outside of the majors, one of the bigger events, and by the way, the PGA Tour's kind of flagship event, it's their Super Bowl. The major championships are all conducted by independent organizations, the Masters by Augusta National, US Open by the USGA, on and on and on. But this was a PGA Tour event, and the events in society were happening so quickly, and their initial reaction was the following day, Friday, the second round, was going to be played with no fans. And then a couple of hours later, as events started to develop, they changed their mind. And your guess is as good as mine. I would have, it was certainly the right decision to make. But a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, a lot of government, local governments, state governments have basically, been leaders, have been followers as well, responding to societal pressure. So I think they made the appropriate response. I think that, they were just in the middle of the hurricane as it was happening and responding to events.
And Daniel, you're the newest graduate from Merrill on this panel, just the other year. You just got a job with the Baltimore Sun. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Covering pro sports there. I happened to be with you at a meeting that had nothing to do with any of this when you suddenly had to bolt to go to Baltimore to cover this story as it was unfolding. Can you relate that story to everyone that's watching, and then also talk about how you feel about what you're covering now and what your expectations of what you would be doing as a sports reporter once you got out of Merrill?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird to think. I was actually just kind of thinking about it. It's almost been a month since I got a call on a Friday morning, early March, the first week of March, from my editor that she wanted me to head to Johns Hopkins to cover a D3 basketball tournament game between Yeshiva and Worcester. And they announced the day before they weren't going to play with any fans. So that was a big deal. I think that was believed to be the first tournament game played with no fans or something like that. So it was a big deal. And obviously we were kind of in the early stages of, this, what would become a pandemic. So, I headed out there, and honestly, I didn't think too much of it. I'd heard about the virus, but, like most people, they didn't have that much information. So I'm just kind of thinking this is a one-off thing. So I go and I cover it, and I obviously don't cover it from an actual X's and O's and a game story. It's more like kind of painting the picture of everything that's going on, and talking to the yeshiva coach. Like they won the game, but a student on the campus had previously tested positive for the coronavirus. So just kind of talking to him about what's been going on. The team was denied. They were kicked out of their hotel, a couple of days before. So it was kind of like a rough period. So I was just writing about that. And, I left as soon as as soon as I finished writing the story and filed it. I went back up to College Park, and I really didn't think too much of the virus after that. Some editors had reached out to me, and they kind of told me to inquire about what was going on with potentially Maryland and whatnot, because I'm covering Maryland basketball. But kind of like Jimmy and others have said, it moved so quickly. Like a week after that, Rudy Gobert had tested positive for the coronavirus, and when the NBA decided to suspend the season, something in my mind just clicked and was like, we're not having a tournament. I was set to travel to Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament the very next day, but something in my mind just told me, like, there's no way that they can have this right now when they're telling people not to gather. You can't have fans, and they're saying that people shouldn't even be gathering in close groups. So honestly, I was just waiting for that decision to kind of come down, and it did. And you saw all the dominoes fall after that. Everyone just kind of suspended everything. And for me, as a sports writer, the first thing was like, okay, well, we can't cover the game, so we have to kind of cover the reaction and how are the coaches and players feeling, and I did that. And that was kind of my intention over I thought, like I said, everything's moved so quickly. I thought maybe it'd be a couple weeks, and then we're back to normal. So I'm kind of thinking, like, even with my sports editors, where like he said, hey, like, try to come up with some ideas for the next couple of weeks. And then we realized that it's not just a couple of weeks. And before I knew it, I got moved over to news, just because most sports had been shut down indefinitely. And at the Sun, we're kind of all hands on deck with coronavirus coverage. So I've really been helping out with that for the most part, and kind of assisting our editors and our remaining sports writers with whatever sports comes up with Maryland.
And that brings up another question, another issue. Frank, you were recently on one of Twitter's most popular sports shows, Around the Home, making another great appearance. And you all were talking about when the football season might start, whether or not the NBA season might start back up. Are we in the sports media giving the public and giving ourselves a false sense of expectation, given the unknown about when anything might start?
I'm doing my NBA radio show every day on Sirius, and you're trying to keep people informed. And I also think you're trying to remain optimistic, but realistic. You're not trying to trivialize anything that's going on. We are here to cover the story, but we're also here to cover sports. The thing is, nobody knows, Kevin. Last week, Mark Cuban came out, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and he said, I think that we're looking at June 1st. I'm going to bet the under on that. He came out today and he said, I was wrong about that. It's not going to be at some time in May. So everyone's trying to guess. You guys know this, the Premier League in England, they came out, they're coming up with this idea of maybe sending all 20 of their teams to camps. They have about 92 total games left. They want to get all those games in. Adam Silver came on ESPN a couple of weeks ago. He said he wants to salvage the season. What does that mean? Does that mean playing every regular season game that remains? I think every team has about 15, 16 games. That seems highly unlikely. I know that they want to get a playoff done, but would it mean all 16 teams? Or maybe 8 teams. The bottom line is, like what Bonnie said before, this is unprecedented. We just don't know. In New York, as everybody did, we all lived through September 11th. We knew that there was kind of going to be an end to that. At some point when they felt that the country was secure, we knew we were going to get back into inside stadiums and arenas. And everyone remembers, speaking of the Mets, playing the first sporting event in New York, that great game on that Friday night against the Atlanta Braves. We kind of knew when it was going to end. The difference here is we really don't know what's going to be the first sporting event and when it might start up.
So Bonnie, what should we tell people, particularly about the college athletic seasons? We just had the NCAA say that they're going to give spring athletes an extra year. Fall athletes, basketball players, they're done. If they're juniors or seniors and looking for an extra year, they're not going to be able to get it. But what do you think the future holds right now for college athletics?
Nobody knows. And, you know, Frank was talking about all of this speculation about when the NBA is going to ramp up again. At least the NBA can look at China, because the virus hit China first. And what did we just hear yesterday? And Frank can speak more to this. The Chinese Basketball Association thought they were going to ramp back up right now. And they're like, no, we're not ready. So at least the NBA can look at China to try to get a sense for timelines. College athletics can't do that. And there are so many different variables, and college athletics seeds at this point, and I've spoken with a lot of coaches and ADs and some commissioners over the last couple of days, nobody knows. But ultimately, athletics can't make any decisions, particularly about the fall and most visibly football, until they figure out what the universities are going to do. There are some universities who are going to have summer sessions online, and we don't know who and what states and what regions will have peaked when. Are there going to be universities in different pockets of the country who may feel they need to have their fall semesters online? So let's just say, for argument's sake, that's the case in some pockets. Are you gonna stage football games on campuses where the kids are still taking classes online? So, you know, there are all sorts of issues that universities themselves are grappling with, and until they make those decisions, athletics really can't. Now, we can get into the whole decision about the complications that come with the NCAA granting spring sport athletes the opportunity to come back. I don't know if you want to handle that at a different point, but the domino effect of that decision is a very long list, and a vast one at that.
Hey, Kevin, let me just add one thing here. And this is probably not something that we're considering immediately, but let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that college football does not return. Can you imagine the domino impact of that? College football and college basketball basically fund the athletic programs of every major university in the country. If there's no college football and no revenue from college football, can you imagine what that would do to not only the bottom line, but just to the functioning ability of college athletic programs?
And ADs are starting to think about that already. I mean, I was talking to Damon Evans today, and I said, well, first of all, I asked him about a percentage, because we've all listened to lots of interviews over the last couple of days. I just heard one with Greg Sankey, the commissioner for the SEC, yesterday, and he expressed extraordinary confidence that college football was going to be starting up Labor Day weekend. I'm getting answers all over the board from people I'm talking to. And when I asked Damon, I said, give me a percentage. He started at 50-50. He ended on 51-49, and that was really based on hope. But I said, what happens if the football season gets pushed, or God forbid doesn't happen at all? The financial ramifications between not getting the NCAA tournament money, not getting the football tournament, and being left with donations and a heavily dwindled special assistance funds from the NCAA, not only are you going to have scholarship issues, but you're going to have staffing issues, and you're going to have to wind up letting folks go or furlough them, and maybe there's a discussion about, are certain other seasons not going to be able to take place? And if that happens, then there are all sorts of Title IX issues. So when you talk about a domino effect, that's not even minimizing all of the different topics that need to be handled one iota.
Yeah, well, and it underscores once again the importance of college athletes in football and basketball to the functioning of major college athletic programs, because if they're not there, then that money doesn't come in. And Jimmy, what about golf? What is going to happen to the golf calendar? And is there any possibility that golf would attempt to play tournaments without galleries and just make it a made-for-TV event?
I think that's certainly possible. As I mentioned, the second round of the Players' Championship initially was supposed to be just exactly that. But the optics of that are not very good. You know, while people are suffering, you know, there's just something about that which just doesn't feel right, no matter how much entertainment we'd like. You know, golf could find itself, but let's just take a step back. First of all, the first thing that we should acknowledge, no matter if we're talking about sports or entertainment or anything in society, nobody knows. Nobody knows. So anybody who's making predictions about what's going to happen and dates, they're just throwing darts. They can be as hopeful as they'd like. You know, now there seems to be some kind of popular opinion, you know, that by the fall that we should be getting back to normal. Social distancing, the president said, you know, it's going to be another month. The governor of New York said that, you know, today. The only golf tournament, major championship, which has not been postponed as of yet is the British Open. And that happens in the middle of July. I think there's some possibility at this point that that could be the first kind of major sporting event that we see, but who knows? You know, who knows? And, you know, in golf circles, what people are talking about, and actually in sports circles, we're talking about this at NBC. Can you imagine if they seem to have the virus under control by the end of the summer? Can you imagine what the fall is going to look like? Nobody's coming out of their house right now because we have to stay inside. In the fall, if they start staging all of these major sporting events again, nobody's going to come out of their house because they're going to be on their couches, because you're just going to have, you know, like a fire hose of every sporting event you could imagine, all four major championships, Wimbledon, the US Open, you know, on and on and on, the Kentucky Derby. I mean, it's going to be crazy. So, you know, I just don't think anybody knows. And my guess would be that I don't think, getting back to your original question, it's just hard for me to imagine that they would hold a golf event, as many people as it takes to stage it, in front of no fans.
And what about just sports in terms of being fans? I mean, you talked about whenever sports come back, it would be like a water hose, just
Fire hose.
A fire hose. The calendar would just be filled. But I'm also thinking about fans. How eager will fans be to come back in droves as they have before? How comfortable are you going to be going to a football game with 105,000 other people? Is that something that you think the public is going to have to adjust to? I mean, what would you say, Frank?
You know, my only thing is, you know, in this country, football is religion in a lot of areas, especially college football. I think we could say that now, but, you know, let's say, and we'll try to be optimistic here, that football gets played in September, which is hard to believe at this point, but we'll play along for a minute. It's going to get played in September and people believe that they're safe. I still think you'll get a lot of people going to games, but I think there'll be a ripple effect. A lot of people are going to be a little bit nervous and, you know, being in front of big crowds. There was a great story in Sky News from a couple of weeks ago about that big Champions League match that was played in northern Italy between a team from Italy and a team from Spain. They called it a biological bomb because they think that's when a lot of people might have gotten sick just from going to that game. I think hey, Kevin, I like you. I think the next time I see you, I'm going to hug you. I don't think I'm going to shake your hand. I think the days of shaking hands are over with for a lot of people. So I think the way people behave and a lot of their habits might change. But again, there's certain sports where people are still going to go to the events.
You know, it's interesting, Kev, for so long, anytime there has been tragic circumstance, whether it's domestically or abroad or what have you, we always put sports on a platform. We always look at sports as the collective arena that brings people together. What's unique about the coronavirus is that people are telling us to stay away from sports, that sports is a danger by congregating all together as we love to do. And sports doesn't discriminate race, gender, age. We all come together because we love our teams. People are saying that's the most dangerous place for you to be. And now, while we've heard a lot about how warm weather can help kill the virus, there has been a lot of discussion about a second wave. And when is that going to come? And how, again, as I mentioned earlier, depending on where you are in the country, where and when could that second wave possibly hit? So, Frank, what you mentioned, it's a conversation I've had with a lot of my friends. Am I going to shake people's hands anymore? Am I going to be so quick to hug? Am I going to be as excited to go to a football game as I've always been? Because we're now all armed with this paranoia that is a byproduct of the virus. And it's a very interesting question.
Yeah, and to add to the unknown, Andy Fauci said the other day that we think that that's the way that viruses work because that's the way they've worked in the past. They take a dip in the summertime. But he said, we don't know because this is so novel. We'll just have to wait. We'll just have to wait and see. Which brings up another question. If we're talking about crowds and the socialization of sports, what does this say about sports going forward in terms of the popularity of esports or the popularity that car racing is seeing right now with the iRacing that's been going on, and people have been flocking to that online, like hopefully they're flocking to this show online. Daniel, I'm sure you grew up playing video games. Have you tuned into any of these esports or even to iRacing or something like that? And do you think that that's an elixir for sports fans who are thirsting for something to watch?
Yeah, well, I can first say I've been playing a lot of video games in my spare time the past couple of weeks, but yeah, I think that esports was already already a business, an avenue that was kind of booming in recent years, and I think that with so many people being sidelined and stuck in the house, you've seen that a lot of even like the NBA, they've done a lot of live streams of esports. They started they asked a players 2K tournament. So when there's an absence of sports, we look for any type of competition to fill that void, and that's where esports is coming in. And I think that one of the things we'll see coming out of here is that people kind of stick with that. It was already on the rise, and we see it.
We have a frozen screen right there.
Yeah, sorry. I guess you lost
Daniel will get back. But the question.
Kevin, can I just say this?
Yeah.
I have, kids right around Daniel's age. I'd rather bang my head against the wall than watch somebody play a video game. So I get it. I'm of a different generation. And I know that they talked about, playing games in England. To Jimmy's point, no one knows. But if they ever got back to playing the games, their idea is even without fans, the government likes the idea just because if you're telling people to stay home, if we can play games, it would entertain people. And as we all know, ESPN has pushed up the start time of the documentary on the Chicago Bulls. I think Bonnie was probably there for every single game. So hopefully you're in it. And that's how much people need sports. I get it right now. The thing about video games is probably fun, but I still think there's a lot of us from a certain generation that's not going to cut it for us.
And by the way, you were talking about Anthony Fauci. I wonder when ESPN is going to do the profile of Anthony Fauci, point guard from Regis.
Regis High School, New York City.
That's right. A picture broke out of him playing basketball at Regis from way back when. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. But you hit on something else here though with the esport idea and the impact that sports coverage and sports are having on the economy of sports journalism, right? The Athletic, who knew that they would actually say that they experienced a dip in, in viewership. Other places are rejiggering their staffs. Daniel's covering news. Major newspapers have folded sports sections into other sections of the paper. So, and we know that TV money drives the prosperity of sports. So might there be an adjustment that has to be made with the leagues in terms of caring less about filling stadiums and doing more with TV production? I mean, is that not a way that we may be headed here? Something that may be proven.
I think that a lot of sports teams have already looked into esports and shifting to online.
Might it be possible that 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 broadcasters and sports start to just put all their money into the broadcast portion of sports?
Well, here's what we know. At a time where the chasm in CPMs and how much brands pay for advertising, that gap between television and digital is starting to close. We still know that live sports is the last bastion of that really valuable advertising spend. It's live sports events and other big live events like award shows and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily know that that's ever going to change, but that's the age-old question that we've all been grappling with in broadcasting, which is how much in the way of rights fees are you willing to pay to focus on those live events, and how much budget do you have to allocate for shoulder programming to keep the level of interest going in those sports and really showcase the storytelling, the human element of all of those athletes that we need to watch. What I will say about esports, Frank, you and I are the same age, and I mean, I played Space Invaders and Donkey Kong as a kid, but
Yeah.
League of Legends and, Madden and 2K are not my jam. But this is a huge opportunity for esports that traditional broadcast platforms are starting to seize. So you're seeing esports on ESPN. This has actually been a growing emphasis for them. And I did a docu-series, sort of a Hard Knock style esports series for ESPN. I was just reading the other day that the regional sports network, Comcast Regional down in DC, they had been playing simulated Wizards and Caps games to replace what would ordinarily be their traditional broadcasts, and doing that with 2K and EA NHL. So as traditional broadcasters grapple with what the heck are we going to do to replace what should be live games, esports is filling that gap. The benefit of that is that these platforms are always trying to figure out how do we cultivate that next young generation of fans, and whether we like to watch it or not, that's what young kids are doing. And so esports might actually get younger kids gravitating toward places where they don't go, because guess what? They're showcasing esports, which is what those kids love to watch, and they watch it for hours and hours and hours on end.
I'm going to ask Katie. My Zoom is tied up, so I can't see the questions from our audience. So I may ask you to intervene, since maybe you can see the questions and I can't, and we can relay them to the panel. I think another issue that has come up through all of this is, and Bonnie, you alluded to it, is like, how during this time are we going to cover sports just in the sports sense? And you hit on it, talking about stories that humanize athletes, a lot more personable stories. A lot of people like the story about, he generated himself, but the story with Steph Curry talking to Dr. Fauci. How much longer can we feed that to the public and have it keep us above water, do you think? Jimmy, I know you've done a lot of those one-on-one stories.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. I'm not really sure. At some point, I think that they're always going to be of interest, but they're of interest because behind them are the games. That's the reason we care. When Roone Arledge, in the early 1960s, came up with the up close and personal, it was a device to make people care about the people they were watching compete. So, the competition, it goes hand in hand. You can't just have the story without the competition. I think it would be, somewhat hollow. Look at the Olympics. The Olympics is a whole other topic, but that's been a big part of the way we broadcast the Olympics for a long, long time. I just think the meter's running pretty quickly.
Well, it's a matter of budget. I don't think any of us disagrees that at a time when there really are no live sports to watch, that on-demand storytelling content is what can continue to drive interest in sports. The problem is, if you look at any network and how they're allocating their budget, most of that money is going toward paying for the rights to broadcast live games.
Yep.
Only a small portion of that is going toward on-demand storytelling content. And Jimmy, you bring up the Olympics on NBC. I mean, how much money in advertising is going to be lost? Because a lot of the brands who put money in for the Olympics may not want to have those dollars allocated toward football or to horse racing or to Notre Dame football and some of the other properties that NBC has. So a lot of these networks that are relying so heavily on advertising, and maybe ESPN is not so much because they're still commanding fairly decent subscriber fees, that's a huge issue. So when you have to decide how you're going to pay for storytelling content, are the dollars going to be there?
And Kevin, like you, I have a newspaper background. So thinking about how the stories are being covered, it's right now, it's really the off season for every single sport except the NFL. The NFL seems to be immune to everything. Their free agency is going along. They're going to have their draft as scheduled. We'll see what happens come July. If nobody's on the field, then it'll be a little bit different for them. But it's a chance now, especially for people in the print industry and, working for online websites. You got to get a little creative. You have to, have some contacts, call people. There are stories out there. And let's remember something too. The players, because they use their social media platforms to, LeBron has done it. They'll help generate some stories as well. It seems right now the theme for almost a lot of the stories we do are, if they get back, this is what it could look like if they come back in June or July or August. And it goes back to what Jimmy was saying. Nobody knows. But as of right now, that seems to be fueling a lot of the stories for the NBA, the NHL, soccer, and sports like that.
What do you think the overall impact is going to be on our business? Obviously, we're taking the sports journalism business taking a huge hit right now, just at a time when it seemed that so many places had made the adjustment to this new digital world. The Athletic was the new darling on the block. Television was doing spectacular. Ratings are up. And all of a sudden, this comes. So what do you all think the impact is going to be short-term or long-term for the way we do business?
I'll try and tackle that. I think that like every other business that's out there, I think that the impact is going to be profound. I mean, I think what a lot of companies are now seeing is that they might not necessarily need the real estate footprint, because a lot of their businesses can be done digitally or exactly the way that we're communicating right now. I can tell you next weekend, I'm going to do the update on NBC, and I'm going to do it from the seat I'm talking to you right now. And somebody else is going to edit it together in his house or her house. And somebody else is going to add whatever needs to be added elsewhere. And I think at some point, communications, corporations, all aspects of journalism are going to kind of take a look when we come out of this, and they're going to say, hey, maybe there are some different ways to do this. We've already seen this to a certain degree. I remember at the Olympics a few years ago, I was out in Russia. I was walking around and I saw something and I said, I wish I had a camera person with me. And then I took out my phone and I recorded it on my phone, and it was a high definition recording. And that's now basically standard operating procedure. When I started in the business, to edit a feature, you would do it in a room that was 2 or 3 times the size of the room that I'm sitting in now. Now, at the highest levels, the most elite production is done on a laptop. So we're evolving constantly, and I think this is going to kind of nudge us towards certain realizations that, there are certain economies that we can take advantage, like every other business.
I agree. I think the coronavirus is just going to further expedite the way the technological revolution influences our industry. I've been a full-time employee for the networks, and now as somebody with my own production company, I'm considered a 1099, an independent contractor. And I can tell you that I have lots of friends in my position in the industry, freelancers who've been let go, projects and series that have been put on hold. You can't even possibly think about pitching a series about football season right now anywhere, because nobody knows if and when the football season is going to start. And it's a very precarious position for those of us who are considered freelance. And just remember, it wasn't too long ago that the worldwide leader in ESPN went through, such a heartbreaking string of layoffs. So the fact that so many of us are being able to broadcast in high quality from our homes. I mean, ESPN and I know MSG and lots of places are just outfitting their correspondents' homes and offices with a good light and their computer and a lav microphone. And that's really what you need to broadcast. So I think the notion of like flying talent from one end of the country to the other, to be in the studio every single weekend, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that fall to the wayside in the not too distant future.
Kevin, we've got a question along those lines. Kelsey asked, there's been a lot of layoffs at newspapers and other print publications recently. Yesterday, Sports Illustrated let go of what seems like a lot of writers and editors that have been there for years. Can these publications recover? And if so, would these vacant positions open up right away, or would it take time? And does it depend on how leagues approach getting back into the swing of hosting events?
Anybody want to tackle that?
Well, Chris Ballard was one of the guys that was let go at Sports Illustrated. And Sports Illustrated is, for Bonnie and Jimmy and myself, Kevin, you as well. I mean, you look forward every Thursday to getting that magazine in the mail, and you just think about what's happened to that place. But it's really a sign of the times as well. Not that many people are buying magazines or reading it. You need to move it to digital content. And it does seem like this, Sports Illustrated was going down to begin with, but this now kind of expedited everything. I know a guy that works for a paper in New Jersey, covers the Knicks. He's now getting furloughed once a month now because there's no season going on. So everyone in the print industry is going to feel the pinch. But what's happened at Sports Illustrated is a little bit different. They've been trying to move to digital, but it's been a struggle. Not as many people I don't get the magazine. I used to get it, for years upon years. I just don't get it anymore.
Yeah.
Here's what I will say, if I can offer a silver lining, because I try to be a glass half full type of person. Technology, if you so choose to view it, can be a blessing and a curse when it comes to employment. Are there going to be as many high-paying, network-level, national newspaper-level jobs? Maybe not. But what technology does do for all of us is that for those who are knowledgeable and passionate, have opinions, have a desire to tell stories, every single one of us can create our own platform. Twitter, Instagram, your own YouTube channel, your own site. And amazingly, when we look at the power of social media influencers and how so many of these folks have learned how to monetize their own content, create their own brand channels, it's not a traditional way of thinking, but it's also not out of the realm of possibility that anybody with talent and desire and ambition and a willingness to learn can create their own brand and monetize it and do really well. I know it's not traditional, but I think that's the way a lot of us can be thinking and should be thinking.
So it's a time to be entrepreneurial, unlike any other time. But of course, that's easier said than done in some senses. Have any of you thought about the impact on young athletes as far as this whole situation is concerned? And by that, I mean, one of the human interest stories that we write over and over and over again, right, is how sports has saved someone from the vagaries of the street. And now all of a sudden, if we look at what's going on right now, and we think about college sports not being there, which is the first step to save these folks, what's going to happen to that class of athlete for whom their athleticism has been a gateway to college and a gateway to something even more productive in society, whether they're a professional or whether or not they're a college graduate with a degree that they put to work in society? Anybody?
Well, I'll take it. Listen, I got to believe, and going back to what I said before, nobody knows. Let's qualify everything by saying nobody knows and apply it to everything. But I have to think that in terms of sports, this is temporary. My son, who plays on his high school basketball team and had the state, they won their division, and shameless plug, and they went to the, the state tournament was canceled. Okay, but he's out in the driveway right now shooting. And
By himself.
yeah, by himself, exactly, socially distanced. But the point is, I think that there may be, there may be a period of time when people don't have opportunities, but I have to believe it's going to be temporary. Sports is a passion for so many people. It's not just going to go away, at least in a participation sense.
And that's why it's gut-wrenching for college seniors, especially the ones that were going to go to the NCAA tournament, but especially the people participating.
How about our Terps?
Exactly. But how about high school seniors? In terms of everything that high school seniors do, whether it's spring sports, you have the prom, graduation, you're only a high school senior once in your life, or at least you're supposed to only do it once. But that's like a great time of life. And it's, at least we got to experience that. So to Jimmy's point, this is more to me about the present. I don't think it'll impact the future as much, especially for these poor kids, high school juniors and seniors and college seniors. It's really tough.
I also think it's a good opportunity to raise the really important topic of mental health, not just for the young kid, whether it's graduating seniors or high schools who have committed to these universities thinking there's going to be an opportunity because somebody's graduating and now maybe they're not. But the mental health piece is so important. You've got kids and families who are being put in this isolation type environment. You've got kids whose parents are maybe losing their jobs and they're very worried about finances. And then there's this topic of the unknown that is the coronavirus that we're all grappling with. And I sort of feel like we're fortunate in that we're at a place in 2020 where we're able to have a more open conversation about mental health. If you're feeling anxious or depressed, it's okay. It's not an indictment on you. But I think what kids are dealing with gives us a really valuable opportunity to talk about mental health and what are some of the tools that we as parents and mentors and folks who guide kids, what sort of tools can we help give them to help them work through that, but also understand what is the temporary nature of this situation.
And that gets to another point about the responsibility maybe that this whole sports complex has to society in general. And I think about, maybe this is on your account, Frank, what were the Devils thinking when they weren't going to pay their hourly and part-time workers during this shutdown? And one of our people in the audience wants to know whether or not sports should refund season ticket holders right now, or hold on to that money and keep it in the bank and earn some interest on it, like we know that they all like to do. So what's the responsibility of the pro sports teams right now to workers, number one, and to their ticket buying fans, number two?
Yeah, I'm waiting to hear back from my daughter's college. When am I getting some of that money back? Because she's taking classes here. She's eating here and she's sleeping here. She's not sleeping at school. But I think for a lot of the teams, you know how it works. They're going to try to tell people, you can use this money toward next season. They're eventually going to have to refund the money. That's obviously how it's going to work. And, I think too, for teams like the Devils, remember, that's Josh Harris. He also owns the Philadelphia 76ers.
Right.
When that story came out, NBA owners like the idea that he was kind of the trial balloon in this whole thing because other NBA teams want to follow it. He got a lot of backlash and then he reversed course. He did a 180, as Joel Embiid said. He did that in less than 24 hours. So that was silly what they had done. They should have been paying those people. I'll tell you what, like I mentioned before, here's a plug. I do a show on Sirius. They're paying part-time employees who aren't even working right now because no one is allowed in the building on 48th and 6th. So a lot of companies really have stepped up and helped employees out.
I have another question, and this one is for George. How do we prepare young journalists to cover off-field issues like this pandemic and its impact on sports?
Kevin, get him to do news. And there are no games now, so this is a perfect time to learn about covering news. And there's never a better time. And they can even spend time doing investigations. So this is a great opportunity for young journalists to do things other than go to a game.
Journalism is journalism.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would totally second that. I mean, I would, before I was able to get into sports full time, I covered the court beat, I covered the cop beat, knowing, you know, how to search for documents, court documents, and those sorts of things. I know there are so many kids who just want to go into sports full time, and I applaud that. I was one of those kids. But if you have that news background, you have no idea when you're in the thick of it how applicable that truly is when it comes to covering news-related sports stories.
Yeah, you'll be covering crimes, and how about when there are lockouts and labor disputes?
Sure,
You have to know that stuff as well.
Yeah, I've always told students that if you're a sports journalist, you're a sports journalist in the newsroom, that will get tapped on the shoulder to cover something else.
Yeah.
It's highly unlikely that the theater reviewer will get tapped on the shoulder to cover game 3 of a series. But Daniel, you're still with us. I see you're just frozen in time.
Yeah, can you hear me?
And now you're covering news. Is that a shock to your system, or did you feel prepared?
We
Yeah,
prepared.
can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, so sorry about
Yeah.
that. So
Daniel?
yeah, I guess honestly it wasn't too much of a
I
shock.
thought Daniel was still with us.
Yeah.
No, he's there, Kevin. He's there.
Okay, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
He's got Tony Reale in his ear back there.
Oh,
Frank.
poor guy.
Go ahead. Dan.
I don't want to say it was a shock. Yeah, I don't want to say it was a shock, but the means by which, like, I didn't expect to be covering a global pandemic. When I actually interviewed for the position, a lot of the interview questions that I was asked was actually about my news experience. You know, I did cover mostly sports at Merrill, but I also was in Capital News Service, so I got that experience. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, he's still going. Keep going, Dan.
Yeah, sorry. So, you know, I was in Capital News Service, and so I got a semester's worth of experience covering the State House and, you know, covering calling the governor's office and State Department. So, like, this isn't completely new to me, but, you know, I didn't expect it to be, you know, covering a pandemic and by these means. So it was a little bit of an adjustment just because I wasn't used to doing it like on a full-time basis. But, you know, I'm kind of in my groove now, and I understand how to navigate most of the stuff now.
He's done, Kevin. Now you can turn off Jimmy's mic.
Well, we have another question from the audience along these lines with WWE, but UFC and Dana White are still talking about going on with their card on April 18. Once again, what should we in the media be advising of Dana White and UFC? Should they be shutting it down like everybody else?
Are they isolating the athletes for 2 weeks prior to the fight? I would think, wouldn't you have to do that?
And wasn't that the plan?
Yeah.
So go with the isolation and go ahead with the fight.
Listen, if we're talking about, our concern should be safety, you know, and if they can guarantee everybody's safety, you know, is there really anything wrong with that? I mean, if they've quarantined people and they tested them negative and they've kept them there and they can assure that nobody's in danger, why not?
Yeah, he tested. So they'll say he tested negative, but he got a concussion because when he got knocked to the ground, the guy jumped on him and hit him 2 more times in the head. Somehow that's legal.
Right.
But if you think about it, though, so Wimbledon was just canceled, and the folks at the All England Club said, no, we don't want to do this without fans. But if they said, okay, let's do this without the fans and let's truly make this a TV event, when you think about how far apart 2 tennis players are from each other on a court, if you wanted to adopt that philosophy, you could do it. Now, a lot of the tennis players might be in their locker room quarters at the same time, and that might create an issue. But if sports would be amenable to, you know, for the individual sports, if they would be amenable to letting these events play out without an audience, we might have something to watch. But understandably, when you think about the income that comes in from the gate and merch and food and beverage and all those sorts of stuff, obviously that would be their preference.
And that's one of the reasons I wondered about golf. And you know, remember a few years ago when the Masters was absolutely fed up with Martha Burke.
Yeah.
And Martha Burke went after sponsors, and the Masters said, you know what? Don't worry about it. We'll do the Masters without sponsors.
Yeah. Well, but, you know, The thing about Augusta National is, for better or for worse, they are, and I know that, you know, George is probably going to kill me when I use this phrase, they're entirely unique. You know, they are in a position like nobody else in sports. You know, they follow what they think is best. And, you know, everywhere else, people follow the money, and that's just never been what they've been about.
We've got one last question, closing in on our 1 hour of allotted time here. And someone wants to know, what is the effect on Olympic athletes postponing a year, especially athletes who only get one shot every 4 years? And I think, Bonnie, you were talking about that before we started chatting this evening.
I think it depends on the situation. There are a lot of athletes who maybe this is their second or third Olympics, and they're of the age where this truly would have been their last opportunity. Now, do they have the intestinal fortitude to train for another grueling year? That's up to them. But I follow, for example, Lolo Jones on Instagram. She's been dealing with some injuries. And so somebody like Lolo, who's a little bit older, has had Olympic achievement, she's actually excited to have that extra year. From a college eligibility standpoint, I think that's really interesting because a lot of Olympic level athletes are coming to the States to compete in sports like swimming and diving and track and field. And once their practice facilities are reopened, if they have the ability, they do have that ability to take that additional year of eligibility at their university, and they have a free place to train, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of athletes, specifically in those sports, will seize that opportunity.
Kevin, it's going to work both ways for the athletes. You're going to have people like Alex Morgan. You know, she's pregnant. She's pregnant right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it would have been a struggle for her to play this summer, but now she'll have a better opportunity to play next summer. But then look at somebody like, you know, Roger Federer or Tiger Woods or Venus and Serena. You know, it's another year for them. So it's going to be difficult. But one quick thing to remember about the Olympics, this is going to be like the time machine for us, because delaying the Olympics a year means that we're going to be in a situation once again, and we haven't been here since 1992, when the Olympics are going to happen next July, presuming they do, July and August, and then 6 months later, we're going to have the Winter Games. And that's exactly the way it used to be.
Old school.
Right, old school, until the IOC staggered them to take better advantage of the, you know, the sponsorship environment.
Interesting. And as interesting as this evening was. So I'm going to say thank you to all our panelists and to all the viewers out there for the first virtual Povich panel. And I think I want to hand it back to George to also say a good evening.
Well, I want to thank everybody for participating. It was revealing, and as Jimmy said, what was your term, Jimmy? Extremely
entirely unique.
Entirely unique panel. And
that's one of my pet peeves, but you know, I used it anyway.
Mine too.
Well, you guys were great to do this. You have our unyielding appreciation, and thank you all for doing it. And we thank those of you who tuned in for watching.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, everyone. Go Terps.
That's right. Fear the turtle, everybody.
And remember, donate to the Student Crisis Fund.
There we go.
Kids and families can use it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Good seeing everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Daniel, take care. Good luck. Jimmy,
Everybody.
stay
Thank you.
safe. Same
Appreciate
to you,
it.
Bonnie. Good luck.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
You too,
Bye.
George.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy retirement, George.